the music off. Like all right up. I think it. Hello, hello. Okay. Can't tell if that's working. Hey, hey, can you hear me? I think my microphone's fried. Yeah, it is fried. Hey, can you hear me? Oh man, I was like, I was about to throw this thing against the wall. Yeah, it's hilarious. Hilarious.
What's up,
is,
pal?
is Jared around? What's up, man?
Oh, just killing it.
Awesome. Awesome.
I don't know about Jared. Jared's online, but it might be Meg the Leg watching Netflix or something.
That's right.
I just texted him, and we'll see what he says. He'll probably ignore me like always.
Yeah. Hey, it happens. It happens. Cool. Well, it's been a long week since Wednesday. It's been quite an eventful / non-eventful week, I guess is a weird way to put it, but it's been an interesting week so far for me. I don't know how you guys are doing, but hopefully you're doing well. Hi, buddy. Hey, last week we talked a bit about, not a bit, we talked a lot about, Obi-Wan Kenobi. In my, I don't know how many part series I've decided to do about just talking about certain characters, getting to know them a bit better, getting to know our opinions of them, where they fit within the star, getting to know all about you. No, we can't go down that road. Can't. I love musicals, by the way, people. I love them. But yeah, so today I had a couple characters that I had an idea to chat about. One of them was Luke. Not just because we talked about him a little bit last week, because we talked about Obi-Wan, and of course that kind of leaked into other awesome Jedi, and of course you can't talk about Jedi without talking about Luke Skywalker. I also wanted to chat a bit about our Admiral Akbar, just because I think he's a cool character, and I've been getting more into him recently with the comic books and stuff like that. But either way, it's an open discussion, so who knows where it'll lead us. As always, I'm Chaz. Thank you for joining us again this wonderful Wednesday. I'm joined by my beautiful, curvaceous Hocoast.
Hocoast?
He's my Hocoast. My co-host, Adam Montoya. Thank you for joining me. But yeah, so, like I said, I've been talking about, like, last week, I, like, babbled on and on about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and my biggest, like, there was like a big underlying question, or not question, but there was like a underlying topic as to what we were talking about, which was like Obi-Wan Kenobi was not that old, I guess, age-wise, by the time he got to A New Hope. However, there was a lot of people online on the intranet saying that, hey, you weren't that old. Why do you seem so tired and beleaguered if you were so young still? And then we kind of talked about that. He was war weary, as well as just have gone through a lot emotionally, and not just emotionally, but physically as well. Hello, Finn. Do you want me to pick you up? Of course I will. And so, yeah, so that's what kind of the underlying tone of why we were talking about him. So, this week I wanted to talk about a little bit about Luke Skywalker under the context of, is Luke the, like, ultimate hero? And I say that to say, not just within Star Wars, but I say that to say, like, within just nerdy fandom in general. We got a lot of heroes. I mean, and they've been defined to us in a lot of different ways. But they all, at least not all of them, but some of them, and a decent amount of them, have a lot of flaws as not just characters, but just as, individuals to begin with. However, Luke Skywalker, I was started to get to think about it a little bit, and I wondered, is Luke the ultimate hero when it comes to his world? Is he like the Superman of Star Wars, or is he just does he just wind up coming out on top in most situations because of luck, because of the Force, because of what have you, or is it destined that Luke is just always going to be the hero of our story? Oh my goodness, did you fall down? You have to be careful. Sorry guys, my son's with me. So I guess I'll start. Like I said, I don't necessarily. All right. Well, actually, before we go anywhere, let's talk about where Luke is at this point. So, spoilers.
He dead.
Oh, he did. At this juncture, spoilers. Luke's dead. If you don't know that, then I'm so sorry. Go watch The Last Jedi, but he died. However, as we know with the Force, no one really actually ever dies. That's just kind of how the Force works. You live on through the living Force.
The Force works.
That's not how the Force works. You live on through the Force, and that's kind of how you, like, we know Force ghosts exist, obviously. So Luke is what we will assume at this point on his way to becoming a Force ghost, or just floating in the Force ether. So that's where he is at now. And then let's talk about where he started as a character. So when we first meet Luke, he's like this farm boy, or actually it's technically when we first, no, I'm right. When we first meet Luke, he's a farm boy in this, like, whatever, far off planet, Tatooine, which you guys are obviously know, or else you wouldn't be watching this with this podcast. So I say that to say to you, Adam, how do you think, coming from, now obviously, like, they had a choice to drop Luke in a couple different places. I mean, they could have put him along with his sister, but obviously they wanted to separate them for a good reason, but he could have gone along with his sister. She lived in this beautiful, luscious, luxurious place with these wonderful politicians, and kind of lived like the high life, whereas Luke lived in like a desert, whatever. So how do you feel that the actual space, where he grew up, affected him?
Space.
Yes, space. Where the final frontier. Where he grew up, how do you feel like that affected who he wound up becoming over time?
I don't know. I think he's got like a lot of respect for, like, he's not like a general. He can't just like move people on a chessboard and kill thousands of people to let more people live. Like, he has a lot of respect for each life, I think, and that might have something to do with where he came from. I do think he evolved a lot from where he came from, though, because when he started, he was pretty angsty and like not wanting to be part of where he was coming from, and he changed and became much more mature and solemn. But I don't know that where he was from really affected him that much. I think regardless of where he was from, he was probably going to be similar. The only thing that I think, I mean, he wasn't even going to leave until he knew his aunt and uncle were actually dead. He's like, all right, well, I guess there's no reason.
Now, was that Imperial Training Academy that he wanted to go to, was that on Tatooine, or was that somewhere else?
No.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere else.
Oh, okay. So now the reason why I think that
there's nothing on Tatooine.
Yeah, there's it's a wretched hive of scum and villainy. But I think the reason why I think that Tatooine never really left him, and why it kind of was that when he did have that final scene, we see the twin sons, and all of a sudden we think like, oh shit, we're back on Tatooine. And
I think that there's part of him that's always from Tatooine, but I don't know that it has as much to do with him as much as it does Skywalker's, because Anakin's basically only from Tatooine. Like, Luke wasn't born on Tatooine, but as far as we know, the Skywalkers started on Tatooine with Anakin. So,
Right.
so I think that the Twin Suns had as much to do with, connecting what was going on in Last Jedi to A New Hope, and the first time we see Luke with the Twin Suns,
Mm-hmm.
and but also connecting with Anakin and Tatooine that way too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think as far as, Tatooine goes, as far as a place to grow up, I mean, it's obviously harsh, it's obviously unforgiving. There's slaves, there's, a whole lot of crime. And I just think it was a distinct difference on how that upbringing affected Luke's father and how it affected him. Like, we know for a fact that Anakin never forgets Tatooine. Even though he thinks of it negatively, he always thinks, like, I'll never be that kid again who came from there. I even believe at one point in time he says, he says, I'm sorry, this was from a book, because I always confuse things, but he was talking to Palpatine, and Palpatine was saying, basically, you are, still affected by, like, Tatooine and how, it's carried along with you up to this point. And, Vader kind of responds, it's only carried me up to this point, if only just to remember how much I dislike it. If only just to keep fueling my hate.
Right.
That's the only reason why I even will have recollections of it, just to keep that anger inside of me, because I was a slave on that planet. So we know with Anakin that where he was from was such a big part of who he was and how he approached the world. Whereas Luke, which ties into what I was saying, my main point, which is he really, like, just a genuine hero? Whereas to Luke, it doesn't seem, like you said, that ever is as a factor or an effect to why he's doing things. It seems as if he was able to, once he had that scene that I know Erica has mentioned was one of her, like, most, like, remembered scenes from the movie, was when he found his aunt and uncle. I feel like right after that, he was able to, like, kind of let go of Tatooine, not the planet altogether and everything, but he kind of was letting his past kind of die. I hate to say die in that instance, but he was kind of, like, letting his past go at that point, and that's kind of what that scene always felt like to me, was like, man, this is the end of my childhood, this is the end of everything I knew, and there's this whole larger horizon in front of me, and that's kind of that to me, that's always kind of been Luke's relationship with where he's from. It's never necessarily been as sentimental and as strong as his father's relationship to the planet. But
I don't know that either one of them really has, like, a strong relationship with the planet so much. I think that because Star Wars is a galactic, experience for the characters, they don't really. Some of them are, nationalistic or proud of their home planets. Like Han is supposed to be. I know he's not in the Solo movie, but in the in the original EU, he's really proud to be Corellian. And there's some planets that are super distinctive, like Kashyyyk or Mon Calamari or whatever. But I don't know that it's not like it defines very many characters. Like when you think of any character, the first thing you think of isn't the planet they're from. So I think for Luke and for Anakin, they're more defined by their experiences, and that has a lot to do with Anakin's resentment and Luke's lack thereof. Luke is really, he grew up with family, and he grew up not loving his life, but really because he was whiny, not because it was the worst life ever. Like, as far as Tatooine lives goes, he had a pretty good life. He didn't have a great life compared to, like, Naboo or Alderaan, but compared to other people in Tatooine, there's not much better you can do. You could have ended up being part of the crime syndicate or a slave or whatever. Whereas Anakin was kind of the opposite. He was a slave, and he dealt with Hutts and Watto, and he dealt with Sand People, and also the what he probably sees as the planet, the Sand People, killed his mom, which is like the only thing he liked about Tatooine. So I think that he probably resents that, because it's pretty easy to equate Tatooine with Sand People.
Definitely.
Because we don't know of anywhere else that they live.
That they
so
hang
I think
out,
that he probably thought of his mom's death as a good reason to not be stoked on Tatooine anymore. But
Yeah.
I don't know that it had as much to do with Tatooine as a planet. Like anyone who grew up with those circumstances, being a slave, losing his mom like that to an indigenous species,
Right.
would probably hate whatever planet that was.
Right.
It's not specific to Tatooine.
Very true. Yeah, that is interesting. I don't ever remember Sand People being anywhere else. And as I thought about that, not to talk too much about Tatooine or the planet itself, but it is interesting that because the planet is just mostly desert and things like that, like we would probably get species or indigenous species, like you said, that you wouldn't really see anywhere else because they've had to adapt specifically to living in this like ridiculously harsh climate. So that's interesting in and of itself. But yeah, I think the other thing for me with Luke when it comes to his heroism and what might have molded and shaped that is probably one of the most important things to Star Wars, which is the relationships between characters. And you're definitely a bigger Luke fan than I am, so I'll leave it to you to kind of answer this one. But who, out of all of Luke's relationships, with Han, with Leia, with Obi-Wan, even with his father, of all those relationships, what do you think was the biggest influence on, or whom, if I'm using whom correctly, do you think was the biggest influence?
It's a made-up word.
It's a made-up word to trick students. But who do you think who had the most impact on Luke, or who kind of shaped his trajectory the most out of all those relationships?
Obi-Wan.
Okay. For the same reasons we talked about last week?
Question. I just think that Obi-Wan is like everything Luke wanted to be right when he wanted to be it during like a really formative time. Like he was, 19?
Right.
When you're 19 and you're like, I want to be anything. I want to be, a cop or something. And you meet a cop who's like exactly what you pictured a cop being, then that's it. Your path is settled. You know what I mean? And I think that, or a writer, and you meet a writer and you're like, oh my God, this is it. And I think that he was like, I want to be, he had this destiny. I think that, that's pretty clearly established that he was the chosen one. So I think his body was probably being drawn towards that destiny anyway, but Obi-Wan sort of showed him, everything he wanted to know. And almost dishonestly too, when he was, he didn't tell him exactly who his dad was right away.
Right.
And I think that helped Luke. So I think Obi-Wan influenced him. He put him on a path that once Luke was on it, he was never going to leave. And even after he finds out some stuff, he still looks to Ben for advice. Ben still shows up as a Force ghost, on Endor after he wins his final confrontation. So I mean, I think that Ben probably means the most to him.
Huh.
And influenced him the most.
So Erica had a comment. I want to see what you think about it. She said that. Hold on, let me make sure I say the right thing so I don't misquote you, Erica. That wouldn't be nice of me. Erica said Obi-Wan opened the door for Luke, but Yoda influenced him the most.
I agree that Yoda had a huge influence on him, but I think Obi-Wan probably selected which path Luke would go down or would end up going down. But I think that Yoda was the biggest influence behind Luke maturing and turning into that sage, sort of quiet Jedi we see at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, when he's like, trash talking Jabba to his face and stuff like that. I think that's all Yoda. Whereas Obi-Wan was like, hey, we can do this thing, and Luke kind of just goes crazy. Down the right path, but he's not very disciplined. So I think that Yoda probably influenced his maturity, but I think that Obi-Wan, he wouldn't have been there to meet Yoda if not for Obi-Wan.
Yeah, so I use this as an example, but I want to remind those listening, or just mention to those listening, I'm terrible at basketball. Not terrible, but just not that good. So I use this as an example very loosely,
Secret
but
weapon.
I use the example. like when I first started watching basketball, this was like mid '90s. Michael Jordan obviously was like the god, like the pinnacle of basketball. So he's the one who got me into basketball. Like started watching it regularly, wanting to go to games, that kind of thing. However, when I started actually playing basketball, I started to model my gameplay style as much as I could, because remember, like I said, I'm not that great. I started to model my gameplay style after Paul Pierce, because I really appreciated how...
He looks like a rat.
I appreciated how... Oh my god, I love Paul Pierce more than anything. I appreciated how tough he was. I appreciated his basketball IQ in tough situations, his ability to make space and create space between him and other defenders, and just a lot of things about his game really impressed me, and I really liked it. So when I started to actually play, I started to play more like him. However, I would say that my biggest influence for basketball was Michael Jordan, because that's the reason why I started even watching it or playing it in the beginning.
Why he even cared in the first place.
Why I even cared in the first place, exactly. So that's kind of like, I think, the correlation I draw with what you're saying, where it's like Yoda definitely was his like Paul Pierce, if you will, or whoever you want to put in that spot. But Michael Jordan will always be Obi-Wan Kenobi, the greatest, to ever do it. So, I definitely see a point in what you're saying for sure, Eric. I think Yoda influenced him quite a bit and taught him quite a bit, because realistically, Obi-Wan wasn't able to actually teach him.
Oh yeah, Luke never would have
much.
become what he became without both of them. It's
exactly.
Like it's not necessarily a competition, but I do think that. I mean, and who knows what Obi-Wan was doing sort of behind the scenes that we don't really know about, living 20 miles away from him for the first 19 years of his life.
That's true. I always wonder what
is literally an influence.
I always wonder what Force influences he might have had. Like, I always have like this picture in my head of like them at like this town square, and like Luke's running around just kind of being a kid, kid doing kid stuff, getting into trouble, and like something almost like falls over on him, or he almost get in an accident, and somehow like he avoids it because in the background Obi-Wan's like making, like I always just thought,
right,
like
he might have adjusted his path a little bit.
Exactly, and, like how much he actually was an influence. Yeah.
But based on what we know, which that's just sort of speculation, I'm guessing. But based on what we actually know, I would still say Obi-Wan, just because, again, he showed him the door, and Yoda like made his path different, and he did it the right way and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But based on Obi-Wan showing him at the beginning. Also, Yoda didn't want to teach him anything. Obi-Wan
Yoda was definitely not all for it.
He was like, this is gonna happen twice.
I really want people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, didn't we already do this and didn't it fail? Yeah, like Yoda wasn't 100% on board, which I want people to remember, because I am one of those people who has my issues with The Last Jedi, but I do want people to remember, who are always like bashing this idea of like Luke didn't even want to train Rey. Yoda didn't want to train Luke at first. It was not something he felt like doing, and there was a lot of reasons behind that. Good reasons too, like legitimate good reasons, some of them in which I feel like Yoda kind of explains in The Last Jedi when they see each other. Again, spoilers, guys, I'm sorry. So I definitely feel like Yoda, he had a very big influence on Obi-Wan, or not Obi-Wan, I'm sorry, Luke. However, I feel like that push, that major catalyst to get him to do these things was Obi-Wan. Now,
if you want to think about it, that Yoda was an influence on Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan couldn't have been an influence on Luke without Yoda.
You could still
Yoda's
make arguments.
The influence of everything.
Yeah, you can still make arguments against that.
How far down the rabbit hole you want to go?
Exactly, because honestly, I feel like Qui-Gon was a way bigger influence than Yoda was. You know what I mean, on Obi-Wan. I feel like Qui-Gon.
Yeah, I would agree in Episode 1, but I mean, once Yoda was on the Council and Obi-Wan was a knight and not a Padawan, right. I think that Mace and Yoda. And others
really
Mace and Yoda had a huge impact on what Obi-Wan was doing.
And as far as like tactical stuff, and again, this is like kind of niche stuff. You got to watch the Clone Wars and whatnot. But Plo Koon also, not necessarily had it, but they worked hand in hand a lot. And Plo Koon was obviously his senior.
Yeah, Plo Koon.
And they worked hand in hand a lot. There was a lot of episodes where Plo Koon was giving some really solid advice to Obi-Wan as a general and as a mentor and that kind of thing. So there were other forces in there too. Like you said, you could go pretty far down the rabbit hole if you want to. But
Right.
On the other end of it, I would even argue that just as important to Luke's character and who he wound up becoming was his father, and that his relationship or lack thereof with his father was one of his biggest motivators and one of his biggest obstacles, when it comes to becoming this hero that we know of. And the points I make towards that are, if Luke didn't have like this underlying, I really do feel like Luke would have just fought for the good of the galaxy because he's Luke. Like, he's a good guy in his heart. Like, he's just one of those guys he's just a good dude, like, to start with.
Right.
Plus, he has all this hidden potential. So not only is he just a good guy, he also has all these powers that and force abilities that have yet to be discovered. However, it begs the question, would he have gone so far out of his way and done all these things, and if it wasn't for this underlying fact that once he found out, like, this was his dad, this was this relationship between him, would have ending Palpatine's reign, would have ending the Empire have been as important to him? I think it would have definitely been important to him enough to keep going what he was doing, but I feel like that his father was the bad guy of bad guys, kind of really helped kind of guide his course. Even if it was like, and I know some people out there who are listening who kind of grew up without their dads can kind of also relate to this, but even if it was in the sense of what not to do,
Right.
there's you learn from your parents in two different ways. You learn what to do and what not to do, and you try to emulate your parents in the best ways that they are, and try to make sure you don't repeat their mistakes. And so and I feel like Luke really did walk that line where he made sure he
literally got
paid
up
attention
to the same decision. He just went to the other direction.
Exactly.
And I think that in a lot of ways, Uncle Owen had a huge impact too, because he didn't want, he was
that's a
so
good point.
focused on pushing Luke away from his dad and from his past and his lineage and everything, that he was so focused on that and not focused enough on who Luke already was going to be as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably had a big influence on Luke too, because
Definitely.
he probably was much more apt to run to someone like Obi-Wan and willing to listen to something crazy and take off from the only place he's ever known than he would be otherwise, because his thirst for adventure was only made worse by his uncle's desire to shut it down.
That's
and I
true.
think that started Luke's whole
that desire
interaction with Obi-Wan in
to
the first
adventure
place.
anyway, that feeling of like, I'm trapped on this moisture farm with my
Right.
boring aunt and uncle. They don't I'm watching all my friends going to these flight schools, and I want to learn more about who I am, but my uncle won't let me. Yeah, you're right, it's that like
Right.
angsty Harry Potter
It's kind of
type,
like Harry Potter. Yeah, Harry Potter would have probably not really. I mean, he would have cared about his parents still, but if his uncle and aunt raised them in a loving way, then he would have been like, I don't really need to go anywhere. This is fine.
I would even argue that he wouldn't have become as great of a wizard as he was without that desire to know who his
no one
parents
can,
are.
Get great without having, like, the worse you have to go through, the better you can get.
Yeah.
And I think that both of those characters went through just about the worst.
Yeah, every time we have an episode, I always want to start a separate Harry Potter podcast because I just love it so much, and it just ties into so many other things because it's just such a great story. It might have to be something I think about in the future, but yeah, no, I think overall, Luke's relationships with people and the people that he was around, really, and not just the old Luke, but the newer Luke that we get to know. His relationship with Kylo Ren, his relationship with his sister and Han, and how that really kind of affected him, and how that shame of almost doing what he did with Kylo Ren, and knowing that was his nephew, and that played a lot into why he disappeared and stepped away. I mean, Kylo Ren murdering, his whole class and burning down the school definitely also played a part. But you know, these relationships definitely, and like I said, you know, before, relationships to me are the key component to Star Wars. The relationships between the characters. You could set Star Wars in almost any universe, really, and as long as those relationships stay intact, it works as a story. The story always works because
Yeah,
of
the relationships are the key to any good story.
Yes.
So it just happens to be a good story.
Yes, and this also, yeah, exactly happens to be a good story. And I say that because we don't quite live in a time where all good quote unquote movies that come out have those kind of good relationships. So it is, you know, kind of refreshing when you go back and watch these movies and the jokes between them and things like that. Like, you get the feeling, and like I said, with any cast on any film set, you get that feeling of their friends off screen. It always leaks onto the screen, and you can always feel that chemistry. And so, yeah, I feel like that had such a big part to do with why Luke is the hero that he is. Now, we've kind of talked about this before. Luke has had several points to turn into something else, and at a certain point in time, he did kind of turn into something that we really didn't recognize as the Luke that we know. And again, Adam will be able to maybe get into more depth about this than I, only because I have a little bit different feelings about Luke going into The Last Jedi. But like, do you feel like that now, the Luke that we see now, is this I'm trying to shape the question correctly. Is this a different Luke, or is this just a same Luke that has gone through more, and now we just see him differently? Or has he changed?
I don't think he's really changed that much. Like, I don't subscribe to the idea that he's a Luke we've never seen before. Like, I think that every movie that has Luke in it, he's not the same character in any two. He was in A New Hope, and he was, you know, big starry-eyed farm boy that wanted more, and, you know, didn't really have much guidance, but he knew what he didn't want, but he didn't know what he did want, if that makes sense. And then yep. Empire, he's got some power, and he's got this thirst for revenge, and also he's finally got friends in his life that are worth, you know, fighting for, and so he's got a little bit more drive, but still not a lot of control. And then all of a sudden, Return of the Jedi, I would argue that in Last Jedi, he's closest to Return of the Jedi, and those are the two times Luke's closest to himself between any of the movies. I don't think that he's similar in Return of the Jedi to what he is in A New Hope or in Empire, and I don't think he's similar in A New Hope or Empire to each other, and I don't think he's similar in A New Hope or Empire to Last Jedi. I think that once he hit Return of the Jedi, he was already on this path to being like an old man, you know, type character, and he was already he'd been through so much already and seen so much that he wasn't really ever going to be just purely innocent again. And then Last Jedi is just a continuation of that, if anything. But I don't think, if you're going to say he's not the same character, then my argument would be either that he's never been the same character or that it's just a continuation. Right. But I don't think that I would argue that it's out of character for him to be the way he is in Last Jedi.
Right. I mean, I kind of approached it like this, where I thought to myself, like, we all, one, I agree with you. I think that each movie we see, like, and that's always kind of been the point. I feel like each movie we see, like, this progression of who Luke is and what he's becoming, and see him growing and changing and shaping differently. When he finally, you know, battles his father, the intensity of the battle, the throwing away of the lightsaber at one point in time, that's all different. You know, I think that if we would have if Luke would have been at that point even a couple years back, he might not have had the strength to deny his dad. You know what I mean? So, I think that just like anyone else, I think, you know, I feel like we have this really bad, you know, habit of saying, like, oh, this character is like this, and this is how I'll remember them, and we have to remember that certain characters are certain ways for a reason. So we have certain characters like Han, who will only ever see so much kind of growth as a character, because he's supposed to be one way, because he plays that role to go alongside these other characters. And Lando will always be like this smooth talking, whatever guy, because that's just like how he fits within this universe. So you do have these like kind of characters that are typecast, I guess, if you want to call them.
There's a lot of motifs.
Yeah, motifs, I guess is a good way to put it.
But I think that it's one of our first examples of it. So I think it's easier to say that other things since then are influenced by it than it is, unless you want to call it like a biblical parallel or something like that.
Right,
but
yeah,
I think that like George Lucas had so many influences in like Japanese cinema and those old westerns and Flash Gordon and that sort of thing, and then also obviously biblical stuff. But I think those motifs and those character tropes are, if anything, there's so many things now that emulate Star Wars and want to
I mean, how many times have we seen Han?
Like, how many times have we seen a Han? Exactly.
Yeah, like we've seen him so many times now.
Or Leia, or whatever, the badass woman for the first time or something. So I think that there's a lot of that. But I don't know that at the time they're so easy for us to fall into because they're like they're just they're good movie making techniques. But I don't think that it's a trope, I guess.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. But yeah, I think overall, like I said, that Luke, he needed, like, it's a natural progression. He changed, or not changed because, Rian Johnson was specifically trying to make, this vision of his happen, which, was a part of it. But I think no matter who would have written the movie, no matter what would have happened, if we would have saw the same Luke that we had known at the end of, Return, we would have been like, well, what the hell? Like, it's been years. Why isn't he different? And so, again, it's one of those things where Star Wars fans can just never have it their way, because if it's one way, everybody's pissed. If it's the other way, everybody's pissed. So there's no winning.
Yeah, and it's a lot like the Obi-Wan aging a lot before A New Hope. I mean, he's been through so much that he's gonna be old. Like, it's not, it's not realistic to expect him to be Ewan McGregor. And I think that also Luke still retains a lot of his sort of, like, he has sort of the best parts of Obi-Wan and Yoda and also his friends sort of rolled into one, because he's making jokes and he's doing things with kind of like a whimsy that that Obi-Wan never really had, but Yoda definitely did. And then also he's got like sort of Han's cockiness, but not cockiness, but just like a dry sureness of himself that he can like use as a wit, and also he's got a lot of Leia in him too. So I think that he's started to embrace just what the universe can make him and what the Force can make him, and as opposed to sort of any sort of ego or shaping what's around him. And I mean it's not something that many characters do. I think most characters try to be, this image that they have of themselves, or this image of what they think they should be, and they try to shape the world around them to accommodate that. Whereas Luke, I think, has finally just embraced, like, I don't actually matter. I'm just a vessel of, this great potential that the Force gives me. And it's my job to sort of just let it be.
Be that conduit, definitely. So before we get going for the night, just because I gotta take the baby off Amber's hands so she can head out to work for the night. Best Luke moment of all time.
Ooh, man, that's tough. I mean, probably the definitive one for me is the Last Jedi saber battle. Okay. I mean, the Return of the Jedi saber battle, rather, because it's the it's always been my favorite saber duel from Star Wars, but it's just the colors and the dark with only the sabers being visible, and the way he, he's there not just to fight to save his friends, but he's also there to get his dad, and then his dad's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll get your sister, and that like just flips the switch. So that fight's pretty cool. It's also the time that Luke has his greatest internal conflict and his greatest, like if he was ever going to be challenged into turning, that was the only time it was even possible.
Yeah.
I think in Empire, the shock of finding out that his dad was like, even if he was going to turn, he wouldn't have been able to really compute what he was doing. In Return of the Jedi, like, he went in there consciously knowing that, you know, that was the choice he was going to have to make, and then even then the temptation was so strong. So that's probably it. But I really like Luke's sort of climax in The Last Jedi too. I think that his reunifying with the Force and the way he embraces it, and also like the power that it takes to do what he did and Force project himself tangibly is ridiculous. And I think that it's just the only time we've seen on screen that illustration of strength. Like nothing's even comparable to that. Nothing's even close, other than some of the games where you catch a Star Destroyer using the Force and stuff. But in terms of the movies, there's nothing even like.
But even
that
still, that's all physical. You know, even still, stopping a Star Destroyer, all that stuff. It takes a lot of. Obviously, I won't take away from it. It's a lot of strength.
No, it's exertion. But it's not like a mental piece. And
exactly.
his move in The Last Jedi is like total serenity combined with like a strength in the Force that nobody could, you know, match.
Yeah.
And not only that, but he transports himself physically, you know, or, you know, tangibly at least. And that's
enough
that's
to be
ridiculous.
able to hand something over
the
to
dice,
someone
right?
else. That's
it's just insane.
Moment. Yeah. That really is insane. It really is. I definitely agree that is. It took me a while to understand it because I didn't want to, and that's just honesty. It was like one of those things where I'm like, well, I kind of get it, but I don't care because I want this, and this is just what I want. And if it's not what I want, then I don't care. And then, that's just kind of how I was about it. And then, you know, the more I talk to you about it, and the more you really do start to watch the Star Wars movies over again and understand, like Luke said in The Last Jedi, when he asked Rey what she thought the Force was. You know, you can lift stuff up and move things around with your mind. You know, that's was in my impression of the Force, that the ultimate show of the Force in my eyes had always been like the Force lightning, or, you know, like what Yoda had done, where Palpatine, where he was just throwing pieces of building at people. You know, to me, I was like, well, that's the Force. You know, that's how the Force works. That's the strength within the Force, is to be able to rip off sides of mountains and move them. But having to understand, when you understand what the Force actually is and what it does and its definition, what Luke did was so incredibly powerful, and just when it comes to being able to use the Force to manipulate things or manipulate people's perception. It was just absolutely incredible. So it took me a while to get sold on that moment, but you know, the weight of it is definitely something that's extremely important.
Like nobody could have ever like dreamed of doing that. It's not even. I don't even know how to put it. It's not even like someone's like, oh, one time I heard of this crazy thing somebody did. Don't worry, you're not gonna be able to do it, but I'm gonna, like, you can at least think about it and dream about it. Yeah. Like, it's literally never even been thought of what he did in The Last Jedi, and he did it with like grace and
aplomb,
wit. Right, he did it, you know, like D'Artagnan, and he did it at the same time as the galaxy, like, hangs in the balance.
Yeah. So it's not like it was a no-pressure situation, right?
Right. He sees his sister for the first time in who knows how long, and, you know, he does all this with, you know, just the ultimate Jedi sort of sage
poise,
grace, and
he
poise,
did it with poise and grace, and honestly, it was very Obi-Wan-like the way he strode out onto that.
Right,
you know,
and there were times where, like, during that fight where he's super, you know, Han-like, where he's, you know, teasing him, and he's sort of, he brushes the dirt off his shoulder. But
yeah,
that's
that
not
was a very Han moment.
That's like a total Han, maybe Yoda, but it's really a Han move.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, I just think that one moment sort of encapsulated the ultimate Force connection that you can have while still living in this plane. And now that he's not anymore, I think if anything, his connection with the Force is only deepened and strengthened.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that there is, we all know the famous moment. If you strike me down, I shall become even stronger than you can ever imagine. I mean, we all kind of understand that so much more now. I feel like after all these movies, because it was kind of confusing then. Like, well, you're not really that powerful. You're dead. How could you be powerful? But I mean, Yoda set a tree on fire. And he was supposed to be dead.
Yoda had a physical presence as a Force ghost, and that moment I was like, what? And not just because Yoda was there, but because he's tapping him with his stick. Yeah. He's got a tree on, like, that's insane. Yeah. And not only did he light a tree on fire, he summoned a lightning bolt to do it.
Yeah, exactly. He pulled a straight up Raiden
on him. Not from himself, like from the heavens of the planet Octo. He summoned a bolt of lightning to that one. That's insane. Right. And I mean, we know that Qui-Gon sort of communicated with Yoda after he died and taught him the ways, of embracing the Force that way, and that Yoda then passed it down to Obi-Wan to train him further, while Obi-Wan was sort of being a hermit. But we don't know how much you have to really embrace your own mortality and your own not meaninglessness, but your place in things, as opposed to the things around you having a place in your story, you being a piece in their story.
Yeah, I mean, Sith
Luke
don't become
did that.
Right. Sith don't become Force ghosts, and that's because of their relationship with the Force and how they use it and how they wield it. They like you said, it's this singularity of self where it's I'm the most important being on this whole existence plane. Like, I'm the best thing since sliced bread, and that's always been the MO of the Sith. So I definitely feel like when you finally die and it's time to become a part of the living Force, that inability to be a part of something greater than yourself keeps you from being able to become a part of that, or to be able to not become a part of it, but be able to use it, in death. So definitely, I think I think if anything, my favorite moment with Luke is the same as yours when it comes to the older Luke that we know. However, I feel like his most significant moment was definitely The Last Jedi, and that was definitely one of his biggest, this is how powerful I actually am, and I am the chosen one for a reason.
To me.
Yeah,
like I literally don't even have to come here and smack you because I'm already more than you'll ever be. And he doesn't even gloat about it. Even Obi-Wan allows himself that little moment of sort of you idiot. This is what I told you was going to happen, and now I get to show you your face. And he sort of said, yeah, I'll be more powerful than you could ever imagine. Whereas Luke doesn't even have to say anything. He just sort of shows up. I mean, he brushes the dirt off his shoulder, and he says, everything you just said is wrong, and all his sort of snarky stuff. But he's not... he doesn't even have to, respect him enough to show his face physically. Yeah. He literally just has to... do his thing from across the galaxy, and it's still more than Kylo could ever hope to achieve. And I think Kylo's never even thought of power that way. He thinks of power as strength and them being synonymous, but I think that Luke realizes that strength and power don't necessarily equate to being the same thing.
Exactly, and that's the downside of pulling from the dark side, is that if you're a dark side user and we get into a fist fight, you're probably going to kick my ass. I mean, that's more than likely what's going to happen, because it's just that strength is your power, and you use that strength to gain more power, and what you see as power is your strength. So it's kind of this never-ending circle. Whereas you're right, Luke kind of understood that those two things they're not contingent on each other. And that's the separation there. But yeah, guys, thanks for joining us. Luke is definitely one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. He is a massive hero, and there's a million reasons as to why. What's your favorite thing about Luke? Who's your favorite hero of Star Wars? Who's your favorite villain of Star Wars? Who's your favorite character in general? I would love to know. We would love to know. Thank you again for joining us. I'm hoping I have a little bit of time off of actual work while I go back to school for a little while. I will be very busy with school, but in the meantime, I will have a little bit more home time on my hands, and while I finish up, finish up my classes. So I'm hoping finally to get our entire library up onto iTunes. I started at one point and didn't finish because I just got so busy. But my goal is to get every episode that we have done up onto iTunes and loaded, so that way you guys can have access.
I didn't know
to
that.
it.
Is it just the audio as like a podcast?
Just the audio, just what we're talking about. So
what's
that's
it on
my
iTunes
goal.
under?
It'll be under Talking Sith.
Cool.
So,
I didn't know that. People have been asking me where they can download it. I'm like, just watch it on YouTube, and they're like, I don't have YouTube Red.
Yeah.
And, iTunes would be better, so I'll let them know.
Yeah, so let everybody know who's been asking that we are, because a lot of people have told me that we just are easier to digest as a podcast, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, we're mostly talking. I just like to play video games, so this is kind of the realm in which we record the audio. However, I do agree with most people that we do fit the style of a... Hello, my best friend. Hi, how are you? We do fit the style of a podcast much more than we do of a Let's Play or live stream. Yeah, you'll find us on iTunes. If I can't... I got a lot of stuff to do this weekend. We got quite a busy weekend ahead of us. However, next week, during the week, I have a little bit of free time. So I'm going to do my best to get us on and up and onto iTunes. And, yeah, you guys can check us out there at Talking Sith. So, yeah, let us know what you guys are into. I'm into these character discussions. They're a lot of fun. It's kind of nice because we leak into other parts of Star Wars as well. And it's nice to just get back to talking about Star Wars instead of talking about all the news surrounding Star Wars. So I've been having a lot of fun with them. So if you guys have any ideas of who you want to hear us talk about next week, please let us know. We know pretty much every character pretty well. There are some characters that I might not be as well versed on, but I can guarantee if you mention the name, I'll know who they are, and I'll at least know enough to talk about them for an hour. So let us know, and we'll see you guys next week. As always, I am your host, Chaz, joined by my very, very sexy ho-coast. Thanks, Adam. I appreciate you joining me, man. All right, I will definitely see you Saturday, and I will see you guys next week on Wednesday. Peace out, guys. See you later. Talk to you later, Adam. I gotta run.